Hello everybody and welcome back to the Leeds Lens. We've got a lot to get into today. We've got all the news over the weekend, but mainly we're going to be focusing on Daniel Farke and the decision to go more defensive. Where does that all align? Obviously, we talked about that on the preview yesterday, but there's been a bit of a fallout on Twitter and on social media, so that's massive news, I think. There's loads to talk about in terms of that. Why are Leeds dropping so defensive? Is that Daniel Farke's problem? Is that something that Leeds United need to work on the training ground? And it's something that Daniel Farke needs to work on in his own management style? A lot of you said yesterday, potentially, yes. But we're going to talk a bit about that. We're also going to talk naturally as well about the relegation picture at this moment in time, because obviously in terms of a relegation standpoint, not been the greatest weekend for Leeds United, if we're being totally honest. Obviously we know Brentford won, Sunderland won, West Ham appointed Nuno, which I think was a negative one for us naturally. Wolves picking up points as well away at Spurs. Really surprising result, that one, if I'm being totally honest. I couldn't believe that Wolves, having watched them last weekend, managed to get a result at Spurs, but they did get a result at Spurs. Obviously that happened. West Ham do play tomorrow as well, of course. Forest did lose though, but obviously Sunderland won as well, as we said. So yeah, a lot to get into in terms of the relegation picture. Not the greatest weekend, and of course Leeds United drew. Jack says, evening Scott, all Leeds that week. Evening to you, Jack, as well. Naturally as well, get your comments in. Let's be interactive. Let's see what you guys think. Do you guys agree with what we're saying regarding Daniel Farke and what people in the comments are saying, or do you agree with my standpoint that maybe it's not as obvious as it seems? So let's get on to that anyway. Let's talk a bit about that, shall we? Because I wanted to talk because there was a lot of talk yesterday, obviously on my channel when we discussed this at length, about sort of where Leeds United lie at the moment, and about the low block debate, and about Leeds United are on top in the game, as we know yesterday, started to sit lower back into a sort of more defensive low block style, and eventually soaked up pressure, but gave the goal away right at the end of the game, as we know. And I think the question's got to be, one, is this a thing that Daniel Farke is trying to implement into the team? And number two, if this is something that Daniel Farke is trying to implement in the team, is this an effective strategy going forward? And is this the strategy that Leeds United need to stick with to defend Leeds? Because there's people that will still say that actually the best way to defend a lead is in a low block, to soak up pressure and hit teams in transition. And other people will say, no, we've got to continue what we're doing, pressing up, high pressing, like we've seen potential from other teams so far this weekend, and get results that way. Like, I sort of look at some of the downsides this weekend, and I watched the Newcastle game earlier, of course, against Arsenal, and they tried to, obviously, they got themselves 1-0 up with a Walter goal, and they tried to sit in the low block and eventually got sucker punched twice by Newcastle and ended up losing the game. However, in the same breath, Brentford went into a low block strategy against Man United, soaked up pressure. Obviously, they conceded a penalty, but Kelleher saved it, soaked up pressure, and then ended up hitting Man United in transition late on in the game and win the game 3-1. So this idea that you can be defensive and it's just all of a sudden horrendous, and that can't be a style for Leeds United to pick up results, I don't agree with. I think this is an approach. I just think there needs to be tweaks to how, if we are going to do that, how we actually implement it in a logical style as such. But that's why I've called this show Farke's Huge Dilemma, because the huge dilemma is, when we're seeing out games, when we get ourselves ahead in games, is the best strategy to hold it out from and sit in a low block strategy, or is the best strategy to sort of sack that and put that in the bin and go for something a bit more attacking and maybe a bit more on the front foot and sort of win by having possession, maybe like we've seen from Man City over the last few years, and sort of control the game in that way, which is the best strategy. And that is fundamentally where we lie. And let's start by talking about the low block strategy, in my opinion, and sort of what Leeds United did. Because it's obvious that Leeds United did jump into a low block strategy yesterday, for sure. However, obviously when you think about that, you think about a tactical implement and a tactical plan from Daniel Farke to go into this low block structure. But I do wonder, actually, if that was the case yesterday, because we know naturally in games, like we talk about a low block, and we know that's a tactic for teams, but we also know game state exists, and this is something that people don't bear in mind. Game state is so important to determine how teams play, and sometimes a tactical plan gets dictated to by game state as opposed to by the tactical plan from the manager. And what I mean by that is, because we're winning 2-1 in the last minute and we're trying to see it out, Bournemouth are going to have the ball, and do naturally Leeds United's players sit into a more defensive style? Does Ampadu start to drop further back, almost into a back three, like we saw against Wolves, where he went further and further back? Do Roden and Strout get a bit more apprehensive about going forward? and sort of pushing the line up and naturally drop deeper and deeper and deeper. Does that happen? If that does happen, is that a strategy from the manager, or is that a strategy from the players? And naturally, like, we're all nervous in games. Naturally, I'm nervous watching them, but the players are nervous playing them. And people might go, there's no excuse in this, but this is natural. This is natural game state conversation here. So if that is the case with Leeds United, and the players do get a bit more sort of apprehensive about going forward, and Bogle doesn't push us further forward, and Goodmanson on the left-hand side don't push further forward, and Roden and Strauch are not as confident to push the game up in case there's a ball over the top that they get done by, is that Daniel Farke's problem? And this is where the whole Daniel Farke question is interesting, because we've talked about game state there and the impact of that. But what's more important about this whole conversation, which I think is really interesting, is that if we are going to go into a tactical setup of going into a low block, and even if that is not Daniel Farke's prerogative, and that is not the way that Daniel Farke wants to see out a game, and that isn't his plan, does Daniel Farke need to adapt his ways to deal with what's going on the pitch? So, for example, the best example I can give you is, we know Bielsa was always a manager who liked to be on the front foot. We know he was a manager who wanted to play possession-based style all the way till the last kick of the game. That was it. That was his way of playing. However, does anyone remember the Man City away game when we won the game 2-1? Basically, we won the game 2-1. Stuart Dallas scored right at the end, but we basically sat in a low block after the red card for basically the whole game. Now, I know that's a different scenario because it's Man City, but naturally, game state dictated that that's the way we played. And Bielsa came out after the game saying, look, this is not the way I like to play. This is not the way we're going to try to do going forward. But it did work for this particular game state. And what Bielsa started to do in that game as well, when he noticed the way the game was going, is he made certain changes in the game to play in that style. To play that style. That was and brought on certain personnel to match that and to match and understood how the game was going and understood the best thing to do. If we're going to play, even if we don't want to play that style, if that's the players are going to play that style, do you make changes to boost that in the best way possible? And what I mean by that is, do you bring on the likes of Bijol at centre-half and go into a sort of 5-4-1? Do you bring on Gruev into midfield and shore it up a bit more in midfield? Do you do something like that? Because if you are going to play a low block, are you better going all in on the low block strategy rather than sort of doing a bit of both, which I feel like we did yesterday? Which is one thing. And the other thing with this low block situation that I think is an interesting conversation, and maybe one for Daniel Farke and the players, is if we are going to play the low block, that's fine and okay, but we've got to have an out ball. We've got to get out, because you can't just sit in. You've got to find a way out. And when we talked about Brentford and how successful they were, obviously, against Man United at the weekend and sort of sitting in, but also hitting teams in transition on the attack, what they managed to do really well is they still offered a threat late on in games. And I think the problem with Leeds United at the moment is, when we drop into this low block, we never offer actual threat in transition. And that is the biggest problem. Not the problem in terms of doing the low block, but it's the problem that we don't have an out ball. Like, you look at the goal Brentford scored yesterday in the 93rd minute, I think it was, that Jensen scored. The ball goes into, they win the ball back in the sort of midfield. They're playing a deep line midfield naturally because they're in a low block. They win the ball in midfield. They play a few nice passes, get themselves out, and then they get a counter attack going. And Jensen ends up scoring a goal. Leeds United at that moment in time wouldn't have done that. Leeds United yesterday, and Leeds United against Wolves, by the way, and Leeds United against Fulham, at that moment in time, were just belting the ball long or belting the ball into touch, and we're not having any control and composure when we get the ball to keep it. And that is something that we've got to work on. So regardless if we're going too defensive in games, even if we are going to go that style, we've got to do that style better. Not in terms of defending. I think obviously the goal ended up coming. But in terms of when we get the ball, we've got to do better at keeping the ball when we do that. And yes, you can go long and you can go into Calvert-Lewin. But like we talked about all game and in the preview, if you are going to go long to Calvert-Lewin, even if it's the 92nd minute, you've got to go long and get it to him so he can actually challenge for the ball, so he can get it on his chest, so he can win a header, so he can actually have a chance of doing it. So many times yesterday, I felt, especially in the last sort of 5 to 10 minutes, last 5 minutes of normal play and the second half of and the injury time play, We'd get the ball and we'd win the ball back and we'd just belt it long straight to Petrovic, not even giving Calvert-Lewin a chance to hold it up. And that is where not just the manager should take responsibility, the players should take responsibility, because they didn't manage that situation as well as they could. And I think when we know in this league, when you suffer wave after wave after wave of attack, you eventually are going to concede. Now we know, obviously, we were literally seconds away, 120 seconds away from getting to the line yesterday, and this would have all been good and maybe a non-starter conversation. But this would have still been a fundamental problem going forward. You can't just do that. You have always got to offer a threat. It's the oldest thing in football. You've got to offer a threat. And that means that when we get the ball, we can't just be rash and booting it long. Whether that is the last, we're talking, that is the last 30 seconds of a game, not the last 10 minutes. And that is what Leeds need to understand right now. And that's what Leeds need to work on. We've got to find a way. And this is, if I'm in training this week and I'm going, right, we're going to see games out and we're going to see it out in a low block. Fine, we'll see it out in a low block. But then I want to, when we're doing this sort of attack versus defence lineups like they will be doing in training, and Ampadu's playing that number 6 role, rather than him just booting it long when he gets it, I want him to try find a pass to a Tanaka, to a Longstaff, to get us out, rather than just booting it straight back to them and then another wave of attacks coming. That is where Leeds United need to work on, in my opinion. Anyway, let's get into some guys' comments. Bournemouth have insane levels of fitness. They're always going to be relentless until the last minute. Imagine if you're sat in a low block, it's draining against a side like that, hence the last minute goal. Yeah, this is my point. But again, this is what I mean in terms of if we are going to play that style and that's the style we're going to go down, we've got to find a way of having a threat going forward. Up until we're literally, the only way we play as if we're in the last minute of the game from about 10 minutes before, and that's the issue. We've got to find ourselves an outball. The low block has been something that's been in play for years. Last year, Forest managed to get in the Champions League by playing a low block. This strategy of a low block does work, and you can sustain a defensive or sort of stop defensive attacks for the or attacks from the opposition for the most part. But you've got to have an outball constantly. Like even you look at sort of Forest big win at Anfield last season when they won 1-0. They're still an outball and they ended up scoring a goal from Hudson-Odoi. But it's because an outball is an option. Yes, they're sat in a low block, but they've got an outball. And we almost, as I said, we play like it's the last 30 seconds of a game when there's 10 minutes left. And we just need a bit more composure, in my opinion. Evening all, says Mark. Evening to you. It was a bit of a roller coaster. So people are just talking in the comments. I was encouraged to see Okafor taking his man. Felt he had something about him. Yeah, no, Okafor's an interesting one. Slightly off the conversation we're on about now, but I do think Okafor's an interesting one. And I thought Okafor was better yesterday because one thing I like with Okafor that he's doing at this moment in time is he's drifting inside on the left-hand side. He picks the ball up almost on the halfway line, but rather than just going straight down the byline, he comes inside and he opens up the whole space and he goes into that sort of adjacent number 10 space and obviously the free space that we've got at this moment in time because we don't play with a recognised 10. And it opens up a ball out to Aronson, it opens a ball out to Bogle, and it opens a ball out to Goodmanson on the left-hand side as well. That inside sort of inverted run that he does is really fantastic, and I think that's something that we can definitely build on. Agreed. You need an outlet in this scenario. No point getting 10 behind the ball and just holding it, asking for trouble. Yeah, this is my belief, Jack. This is completely my belief. I don't actually, when I think about it, I don't have a huge issue with the low block. And I know some of you guys too, and you think we need to be more aggressive. I don't have a huge issue. I just think we need to have the balance a bit better in terms of if we are going to do a low block, how do we play out from the low block? How do we do that? That is fundamentally where I stand on this, really. I think, yes, okay, fine, not ideal, but we can find a way. And then if we'd have done that and we'd have got it over the line yesterday and we'd have played and we'd have, like against Everton, I don't think it was a big of an issue. I thought we had a bit more going forward, even in the last few minutes. Like I remember Stack having a shot, I think, on like the 92nd minute. So we offered more of a threat. But that's just something we'd have to work on naturally in training, to be less rash. And to be honest, it comes from the captain a bit. I think of all players in the team, Ampadu's the worst for it, for just belting it long. But yeah, just a bit more composure, really. So yeah, that's currently where I'm at with it. Anyway, let's move on to the second sort of talk about the show, and this is the relegation battle and where we're at the moment. Because obviously Leeds picked up, I think, probably looking back, a probably decent point for Leeds United yesterday, especially knowing that we've obviously got the win against Wolves. So we've got over the last two games, you take 4 points all day going into the Wolves game for sure. So I think we've got two good results there. Obviously, it's such a shame we didn't get over the line because it was so important. And I think the more disappointing thing about this weekend is when I look at other relegation candidates, they've had a good weekend. Brentford beating Man United, Sunderland winning probably a surprise win away at Forest. Obviously, Burnley got pumped. Wolves getting a draw away at Spurs. That was nice that obviously Paulinho scored right at the end, put a sort of dampener to that. And also, but more important than all these results, is that West Ham appointing Nuno, who was the one manager I didn't want to go in there because of all... I looked at West Ham, we've talked about this on the channel before, the negativity that's created in that club at this moment in time and the way they were conceding from set pieces and other things. I look at it and I go, that's disappointing. That's disappointing. Anyway, let's get some more comments as well. You have to be adaptable in the Premier League. Look at Pep against Arsenal. That's the last person you expect to sit in, but it just proves it's needed depending on game state, like you said. Yeah, exactly. And I know. Obviously, they gave up a goal right at the end as well, Man City. So it's probably a bit of a people won't look at that as positive as it probably was. But actually, I think if Man City had continued to open up in the second half, they would have definitely been beaten by Arsenal. So I do think the low block approach was the best one from Pep, and it was just a bit unlucky that obviously it was a lapse of concentration in the last minute, and the ball goes to the top, and they end up scoring a goal. So I have no problem with the low block. Obviously, it's a bit nervy, but if it's used properly, it's effective. Exactly. This is my point. Yeah, that's completely my point. But yeah, back to the conversation anyway about the relegation battle. I look at it at the moment, and I watched the Sunderland game quite aggressively. And I watched aggressively, not the right word. I watched the Sunderland game in its full sort of team, and I looked at Sunderland. At this moment in time, for me, they don't look like they're going to have a team that they don't look like a team that's going to go down. And when I look at it sort of a bit in more detail, I think Wolves and Burnley, for me, I can see us easily finish above them. I think they're two that look really, really vulnerable in my mind. But obviously, we need to finish above 3. And I look what's happening at the other clubs for me that are sort of most likely to get relegated. The likes of your Brentfords, the likes of your West Hams, the likes of Sunderland's, and I look at them 3, and they've had a good weekend. 2 of them have won, and 1 of them have appointed Nuno. And I think that's been a bad weekend for Leeds United. And looking at the way Brentford played, and Thiago up front, and Otara and Sade up front as a front 3, that looks like quite a strong team in my opinion, especially going forward. I think that's a slight worry. So I think what Leeds United have to do at this moment in time for me is that, all right, we've got this system but we've just got to focus on our journey at this moment in time for me. We've got to focus on our journey. And yes, they've all had good results this weekend, but I think the biggest lesson I would take from this weekend is we've just got to get to our points total. And my belief is that this points total this year is going to be 40. I think you're going to need 40 to stay in this division. And if we do get 40, I think there will be 3 teams lower than that get less than that. So I'm at the moment in time, I'm slightly struggling who's going to be that 3rd team. I think it'd be interesting to see how West Ham do get on with Nuno, because I think everyone's just gone, oh yeah, now they'll be absolutely fine. But we said that for a long time under Sam Allardyce, that he was the man that never got anyone relegated until he gets someone relegated. So I think it'd be interesting to see obviously how West Ham sort of cope with Nuno going in there, and if he makes that impact that we sort of expect him to make. They've got 2 hard games coming up. West Ham, they play Everton tomorrow night, which I think will be tricky at the Hill Dickinson Stadium. And then they play Arsenal. So they'll be interested to see how they get on in them 2 games. But I look at it and I think it's been, as I said, for other teams, and we've not had a bad weekend ourselves, but I think for other teams, it's been quite a strong weekend, in my opinion. Great result for Sunderland. They look serious. I do think Forest have got an appointment wrong and could be in trouble. Congested fixtures. Yeah, I think Forest are an interesting one. Obviously, the thing that I always picked up about Nottingham Forest, and I think this could be interesting in terms of where they're going to be at. Forest under Nuno were the least running team in the whole division. They were the team in the division that ran the least. They've gone to a style that runs the most in the division, which is a massive transfer. And they are going to start picking up injuries. They've built a team based off me on a low block style. So that switch of style to Ange is going to be interesting. My only thing with Forest at this moment in time is I do think they've sort of, a lot of the recruits in summer are pretty decent, and they've got a lot of quality there. So that is my only concern. However, we have seen under the wrong manager and under the wrong conditions, the likes of Leicester went down, as I said, with Vardy's and Tillemans and Maddison's and Barnes. So these top quality squads can get relegated in the wrong environment and with the wrong manager at the helm. So I do think that sort of Nottingham Forest are vulnerable. I just currently look at them and wonder sort of a few things could go right there and they could start to push up the league, in my opinion. So as I said, that is why for me at this moment in time, Leeds United have just got to focus on themselves. Leeds United at this moment in time have just got to focus on on the aim, which was the start of the season for me, is going to be 10 wins and 10 draws. That's always been my point. Get 10 wins, get 10 draws, you will stay up. Because I wouldn't expect 40 points. 40 points probably will keep you up, as it always does. So that's my only thing at the moment. Yeah, I think Sunderland could be a write-off. They could finish mid-table. The only thing with Sunderland, though, is, and obviously everyone's bigging them up right now, and I know it drives us Leeds fans mad, and it almost drives me mad talking about Sunderland. Because we're constantly compared to Sunderland in every metric because we're newly promoted, even though we're in a financial state we're slightly different, just based on the fact that they had more PSR wiggle room going into the window, hence they could spend a bit more money than we could. But Sunderland have played easy games. They've played West Ham at home. They've played Brentford at home. They've played Forest away, who were in a bad moment at this moment in time. They played Villa, who were in a bad moment when they played them. They played Burnley as well. So they've had good games. Let's see how Forest get on when it gets a bit more tricky for them. And when they don't go on a good run, can they bounce back? When they go through that period over AFCON, can they bounce back? But yes, right now for Sunderland, they do look in a good shape. I think that's annoying. And that's the annoying thing about the playoff final. Like I've said a few times, I was at the playoff final, and I didn't really care who get promoted at the time. If I'd known the financial situation of Sunderland and how much they would have been able to spend in comparison to what Sheffield United would have been able to spend, it'd have been so much better for us if Sheffield United had been promoted. I think if Sheffield United promoted, I'd be really, really sure that Leeds United are going to stay in the league at this moment in time. Because I do feel like I watched yesterday, and I know you guys are probably all a lot like this as well. I watched the performance levels, and I've watched the performance levels over the whole season as far, and I feel like I want to come out and say, this team won't get relegated playing like that. That's what I want to say. I feel like that's what I want to say at this moment in time. As I said, I look at the performance yesterday, and all right, we made a few mistakes, but the performance level was really good. We deserve to beat Bournemouth, who I think are a really strong team. And I said I want to come out right now and say, and maybe in previous years I would have come out and said, oh, this team will not get relegated. But I look at the strength of other teams, and I don't know, I just don't think you can say that at this moment in time. I really don't, but it's frustrating. But as I said, that is why I think we've got to, rather than going, ooh, who are Leeds United going to finish above? Are they going to finish above Brentford? Are they going to finish above this team? Are they going to finish above that team? Just going, let's sack everyone off. That'll deal with itself by the end of the season. There will be 3 teams that get less than 40 points. There has been for the last whatever donkey's years. Teams have got under 40 points. Get your job, get to your 40 points, get to the points total that Leeds United wanted at the start of the season, and that will deal with itself. 3 teams will get less than 40 points and will stay in the division. And that's got to be the job, and that's got to be the remit of the manager, and that's got to be the remit of the players. Stop getting fixed up on sort of thingies and just look at what points we're trying to go for. It's like in the Championship last year. Like, we could always get fixed over on, oh my God, Sheffield United are bloody winning every week, and Burnley are, and all this is fantastic. But at the end of the day, if you get 100 points in the Championship, you get yourself promoted. And that obviously worked out in the end for Leeds United. We got 100 points, we got ourselves promoted. Sheffield United didn't, I know they look like at some point they might get 100 points, but again, they fell away, and something will always happen. And the points totals usually stand about where they are. So it's the same as that. We've just got to go for what we're trying to do for 50 goals, over 40 points, and we'll stay in this division. But as I said, I genuinely felt yesterday, having watched it, I was like, I want to be positive and come out straight after the game and go, do you know what it is? We've drawn the game right at the end. Perform like that and we'll stay in this league. And I think we'll stay in this league at this moment in time. But I feel it's hard to say that because I don't see 3 obvious teams. But that's why I've got to remove myself from that as well. Not writing off Mark yet. It's a long old season, and AFCON is set to rip their squad apart for a month. But agreed, they look a well-oiled machine. Yeah, that's how I feel. Agreed. Ticket game by game. Every game is a cup final. Yeah, no, I agree. Anyway, bit of a shorter show as we always do on Sunday. We'll be back tomorrow to discuss in more detail. And obviously, naturally, Sunday is usually quite a day in terms of like news and stuff. Whereas Monday, all the journeys are back. You get all the stories over the weekend. So we should have loads to get into on Monday, as we always do, which will be live. We'll be live this week. Monday at 8 p.m, Tuesday at 8 p.m, Wednesday at 8 p.m. Thursday is going to be tricky for me. But Friday show will be there as normal. Saturday, we'll have a match reaction as always. And Sunday, we'll be back on Sunday. So a huge week next week. Basically, we're going to have 6 live streams at 8 o'clock. And 6 live streams and then obviously 1 pre-record. But yeah, so I hope you enjoyed that. Obviously, you got to this point as well. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you could do a like, subscribe, all that good stuff does massively help the channel and boosts it up in a time when it's quite tricky. And obviously, I'm only a small channel. So the more support I get, it gets it out to the people and YouTube can push it a bit more. If you're a bigger channel, obviously everyone sees the content anyway, but because I'm a smaller channel, the more help I get from likes and subscriptions and all that, it really does appreciate. It really does help me, so I would appreciate that. But yeah, thanks all for watching, as always, and I'll see you later, everybody. Oh, also, the other thing I was going to mention is follow the Twitter page, because then you can see where I'm always live and sort of what's going to happen. It's always a good thing, which is just the Leeds Lens. It's quite easy to find. Anyway, I'll see you all later, everybody. Bye for now. Bye for now.